Have you ever wondered what ancient walls and forgotten treasures would say if they could speak? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where lost civilizations whisper through stone and fire. From Akrotiri's painted ruins to Petra's red canyons, their echoes still linger in time. Like and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is there. The wall that bled red, beneath the blue haze of the Aegean Sea, where the sunlight melts against white cliffs and the wind carries the scent of salt and ash. There lies an island shaped by both creation and destruction. Santorini, once called Thera, holds within its broken heart a secret city. It sleeps beneath layers of volcanic stone, buried yet breathing still, its walls painted in colors so vivid they seem to move when the light touches them. This is Akrotiri, the lost city that art refused to abandon. Long before the volcano roared, before the earth split open, Akrotiri was alive. Narrow streets twisted between whitewashed houses, their walls smooth with lime and clay. Fishermen carried baskets of silver-scaled catch from the harbor. Women in flowing robes leaned over balconies, speaking softly across alleys lined with flowers. The air smelled faintly of olive oil and fresh bread, of salt and beeswax, and deep within those walls, artists painted. They mixed pigments with minerals, crushed ochres and iron into powder, ground lapis lazuli into blue dust carried from faraway Egypt. These were not mere decorations. They were living stories, prayers whispered through color, memory written in motion. The people of Akrotiri painted their lives not to impress gods, but to hold on to the rhythm of existence itself. In the quiet of dawn, one could hear the scrape of a brush, the murmur of pigment stirred in water, a hand tracing the curve of a flower, the ripple of sea foam, the tilt of a woman's face turned toward the horizon. Every stroke was precise and patient, every color breathed. Then came the red, a red so deep it seemed to burn through the plaster. It was iron oxide, mixed with earth and fire, the color of clay after rain, of blood under the sun. The artists used it to mark what mattered most: the divine, the eternal, the human pulse. In one home, now known as the House of the Ladies, the fresco glows with that same crimson fire. 3 women stand among floating lilies, their garments swirling, their faces serene. The red wraps around them like a living flame, and when archaeologists uncovered it thousands of years later, it seemed, they said, to bleed. The red had not faded, it had deepened, as though the wall itself had remembered the heat of the volcano that would soon consume it. Akrotiri was no myth. It was a city of engineers and dreamers, traders and thinkers. Its homes had drainage systems, upper floors, windows that caught the sea breeze. And on those walls, every surface alive with color, the people told who they were. Monkeys leaped across trees, blue dolphins danced across the sea, boys carried fish through narrow streets, and priestesses offered saffron to gods older than their own names. These scenes were not imagined, they were echoes of life, captured at the edge of catastrophe. Beneath the beauty, though, the earth trembled, small at first, just a whisper underfoot, then louder. The people of Akrotiri began to leave. One by one, they packed their belongings, covered their frescoes with cloth, and walked toward safety, perhaps never knowing they would not return. When the volcano finally erupted, it silenced everything. The sky turned black, the sea boiled, and the air grew thick with fire. Ash fell like snow. The city vanished in hours, but the ash that destroyed it also became its guardian. It sealed every wall, every color, every brushstroke in perfect stillness. For centuries, Akrotiri lay beneath the earth, untouched, a city caught in the breath between life and death. When modern archaeologists rediscovered it in the 1960s, they found rooms intact, pottery still on shelves, staircases unbroken, frescoes gleaming as if newly painted. And when they brushed the dust away from the red walls, the air shimmered. The pigments had survived not because of chance but because of design. The Minoans had known how to bind color into lime plaster while it was still wet, a technique that made the painting part of the wall itself. The red of Akrotiri was not painted on stone, it was the stone. The wall that bled red, as it came to be called, was more than art, it was endurance made visible. The pigment pulsed with heat when sunlight touched it, as though the fire of Thera still glowed beneath. And in that red, some say, there lingers the memory of the last sunrise the people saw. For centuries the frescoes slept in darkness, and yet they remained radiant. Some who've stood before them say the red seems alive. It shifts, faintly, as if it remembers movement. Others claim the walls hum when the air is still, that you can almost hear brushes scraping across plaster, the echo of creation in the silence of ruin. Akrotiri was not Atlantis, though the myth would later borrow its bones. It was something far more human, a place where art became memory, and memory became survival. Even after millennia, its colors whisper across the ages, saying, "We were here, we lived, we loved, and even the fire could not take us." As the archaeologists closed their notebooks and the sun began to set beyond the caldera, the red on the wall caught the fading light once more. It shimmered softly, like a pulse. The day's dust rose, settled again. The silence deepened. The fresco did not fade. It waited, as it had always done, for someone to remember what it meant to be alive before the end. When the archaeologist returned the next morning, the sunlight poured through the half-open roof of the excavation shelter and struck the wall once more. For a moment, the red glowed so vividly that one of the team whispered that it looked wet, as if the pigment had only just been brushed on. The air was still and cool inside the buried chamber, heavy with dust, the faint scent of volcanic earth clinging to every stone. They stood in silence, gazing at the wall that had waited more than 3,000 years to be seen again. The fresco seemed to breathe. The wall that bled red, that's what it was soon called, became one of the most haunting discoveries in all of Akrotiri. Scholars debated its meaning. Was it a scene of worship, a ceremony, a fragment of myth? The figures appeared to move in ritual grace, women carrying saffron, flowers rising like smoke, a priestess turning her gaze to something unseen. Yet beyond the symbols there was something else, a pulse, a presence that defied time. It was as if the color itself, the deep iron red, had carried a memory not of what the people painted, but of how they felt when they painted it. Every brushstroke, every curve of red upon white, seemed alive with rhythm, the rhythm of a heartbeat that had once echoed through the island. The pigment wasn't just decoration, it was the residue of human emotion, trapped in lime and ash. When sunlight struck the wall, it was not only illumination, it was resurrection. The heat reawakened the minerals, and the red burned faintly brighter, as if exhaling after millennia of holding its breath. The archaeologists uncovered more rooms, more walls telling more stories, ships with bright sails, men diving into the sea, monkeys climbing trees heavy with fruit, women gathering crocus flowers under the mountain's shadow. Akrotiri was not a place of mythic heroes or battles. It was the story of people, traders, priests, painters, who had lived in a world of color and motion and who vanished in silence. The deeper they dug, the more they began to realize that this city had been no small settlement. It was a hub of the Aegean, a meeting point of Minoan artistry and Cycladic vision. Its people understood architecture, mathematics, hydraulic engineering, and above all beauty. Their houses were built to breathe, their walls to speak. Each fresco was placed not merely for decoration, but for light, designed to glow when the morning sun struck at just the right angle. The city itself was an instrument of art, and the walls were its music. The red that dominated so many of the frescoes wasn't accidental. It came from hematite, an iron-rich mineral they traded for across the sea. To create it, they ground the stone to fine dust, mixed it with water, lime, and sunlight, binding not just pigment but purpose. They knew that red was sacred. To them it was the color of life, of divinity, of rebirth. In their mythology, red was the bridge between the living and the gods. When they painted in red, they weren't recording a moment, they were speaking to eternity. When the eruption came, it must have been sudden, but not unexpected. Tremors had already shaken the island. The sky would have turned dark with ash before the final blast. The people likely had time to leave. Few human remains have been found. They may have fled by sea, believing they would return, but the sea they trusted became their undoing. The eruption of Thera changed the world. It sent waves across the Aegean, blanketed Crete in ash, dimmed the sunlight for years. And yet, in that cataclysm, Akrotiri was preserved, its colors sealed inside a tomb of stone and silence. Centuries later, when the Greek archaeologist Spiridon Marinatos uncovered the site, the first thing he noticed was the color. The red seemed impossibly alive. It was not dull or faded, but pulsing, like blood newly exposed to air. The discovery stunned the world. Here was a Bronze Age city, untouched, its art so vivid that it shattered assumptions of what prehistoric life had been. The frescoes were refined, graceful, human. They were not primitive, they were poetic. But for those who spent years studying them, the real mystery was not the technique, it was the feeling. The frescoes of Akrotiri were not about conquest or power. They were about harmony, the balance between humans and nature, the rhythm of existence. And the red, always the red, carried that feeling like a heartbeat beneath the surface. Modern conservators work under filtered light now, their tools small and deliberate, their breath held as they touch the plaster. They know that one careless move can erase 3,000 years of history, but they also say there is something unexplainable about these walls. When they clean away the volcanic dust and the pigment shines through, they often feel a moment of stillness, as if the air thickens, as if the past is close enough to hear. And in those moments they imagine the artist, the hand that once mixed iron and sunlight, that pressed color into stone, that stood before a blank wall and chose to create instead of despair. Perhaps that artist knew what was coming. Perhaps painting was their way of holding on, a final act of defiance against the volcano, against time. When the frescoes are lit under soft light for visitors, there's always one wall that captures every eye. The figures are painted in motion, robes fluttering, hair curling like smoke, and at their center, a burst of red spirals outward. It looks like fire, but also like life itself, radiating warmth across the centuries. No one knows exactly what it depicts, but everyone who sees it feels the same quiet awe. It is as if the wall remembers being alive. Outside, the sea laps gently against the island's dark shores. The caldera lies silent, its waters still, but deep beneath, the magma stirs, patient, waiting, eternal. Just like the red on the wall, the volcano destroyed Akrotiri, but it also gave it immortality. The people who once painted those walls are gone, but their colors still burn. They left behind no written words, only this, the red that refuses to fade, the proof that even in silence, art can speak. The wall that bled red is not just a relic, it is a heartbeat that survived fire and time. It whispers the oldest truth of all, that creation is stronger than destruction, that memory can outlive death, and that somewhere beneath every ruin, the past is still alive, waiting to be seen again. And as night falls over Santorini, the ruins glow faintly under the moonlight. The frescoes lie in darkness, but the red remains, hidden, patient, breathing. The wall waits, as it always has, for the light of morning to return, to awaken the color that once bled and still burns. The tomb that faced the sky. There is a silence that lives in the Valley of Mexico, the kind that feels ancient, older than language, older than memory itself. It's a silence broken only by the wind sweeping through the plains and the low hum of insects beneath the sun. And in the center of that stillness stands a mountain that is not a mountain at all, a structure of human hands and divine ambition, built from stone and fire. The Pyramid of the Sun. When the Aztecs first came across it, long before the Spanish ever set foot in the Americas, they called this place Teotihuacan, the city where the gods were born. They believed the sun itself had emerged from this sacred site, that here, in this valley of dust and sky, the gods had kindled the first fire of creation. But the Aztecs did not build Teotihuacan. They found it already ancient. Its builders had disappeared centuries before, leaving behind no writing, no ruler's name, only monuments so vast that even gods seemed small beside them. Teotihuacan rose around the 1st century CE, and for nearly 500 years, it thrived as one of the largest cities on Earth, rivaling Rome, Chang'an, and Alexandria in scale. More than 100,000 people lived here, their homes arranged in neat geometric grids. They built temples aligned with the stars, pyramids shaped to mirror constellations, and streets that ran as straight as the sun's path across the sky. At the center of it all was the Avenue of the Dead, stretching more than 2 kilometers, lined with ceremonial platforms, and shadowed by pyramids. But one pyramid towered above the rest, a structure so immense that it dominated the city's skyline, and even today, nearly 2,000 years later, still commands awe. The Pyramid of the Sun rises nearly 70 meters high, built from over 1 million tons of stone and earth. Its base measures the length of 2 football fields, and it is perfectly aligned with astronomical events that mark the rhythms of ancient life. No one knows exactly why it was built. Some say it was a temple dedicated to a sun god. Others believe it marked the site of sacred caves that represented the womb of the earth. Beneath the pyramid, explorers discovered tunnels, a labyrinth carved into volcanic rock that may have existed long before the pyramid itself. These caverns were filled with offerings, obsidian blades, clay figurines, jade jewelry, seashells carried from faraway coasts. They speak of a people who believed this place was a bridge between worlds, a place where heaven and earth met, and the souls of the living could reach the realm of the divine. Imagine it as it once was. The pyramid's surface gleamed with bright plaster, painted red and gold, shimmering under the sun. Pilgrims climbed its steep stairs carrying offerings, the sound of drums echoing down the Avenue of the Dead. From the top, priests dressed in feathers and obsidian would stand against the horizon, their silhouettes framed by the blazing light of the setting sun. Below them, tens of thousands of citizens gathered, silent, reverent, their faces lifted toward the peak as if waiting for the sky to open. Archaeologists have long studied its perfect symmetry, its mathematical precision. The pyramid's orientation, 15.5 degrees east of true north, aligns with the setting of the Pleiades star cluster and the movement of the sun during key agricultural seasons. It is a monument written not in words but in geometry, a structure that speaks the language of the cosmos. And yet, for all this brilliance, Teotihuacan left no trace of its rulers. No king's tomb, no royal inscriptions, no names. Unlike the Maya, who filled their cities with carvings of their kings and gods, Teotihuacan's builders left only symbols: the feathered serpent, the jaguar, the water goddess, and the sun itself. This has led some scholars to believe that power here was collective, that perhaps no single ruler governed the city, but rather a council of priests and astronomers who served as guardians of cosmic order. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun lies one of archaeology's greatest enigmas, a cave carved into a cloverleaf shape, its four chambers extending outward from a central passage. To the people of Teotihuacan, caves were portals to the underworld, the place where life began, and where the sun traveled each night. Some think the pyramid was built precisely above this cave to mark the axis of the universe, the point where creation began. In the 1970s, researchers entered these tunnels and found strange deposits, layers of charcoal and ash, animal bones arranged in patterns, and traces of offerings burned long ago. Some believed human sacrifices took place here to sanctify the structure, to feed the sun with life so that it might continue to rise. Others think these were symbolic offerings, ritual acts of renewal marking the cycles of planting and harvest. Still, the silence of Teotihuacan endures. Its murals speak in symbols, not words. Serpents curl around suns. Gods pour water from clay jars to nourish the earth. Warriors with butterfly wings stride across crimson walls, holding shields shaped like flowers. To walk through the ruins today is to wander through dreams preserved in stone. Each mural, each stair, a fragment of meaning that feels close to revelation but never fully yields it, and there is something deeply human about that mystery. The people who built the Pyramid of the Sun lived, loved, farmed, traded, and dreamed beneath the same sky we see now. They watched the stars, marked the solstice, and believed that their world was one thread in a vast cosmic web. To ensure that web remained unbroken, they built, not just for themselves, but for the gods. When you stand at the foot of the pyramid today, the air seems to vibrate faintly. The stones radiate warmth, as if still remembering the hands that placed them. The stairs rise sharply, 1,000 years of wind and footsteps carved into their edges. And as you begin to climb, you feel what countless others have felt before, that strange sensation of ascent, not just upward, but inward, towards something older than human memory. The sun sets slowly over the Valley of Mexico, turning the pyramid's surface to gold. Shadows stretch across the Avenue of the Dead. In that moment, Teotihuacan feels alive again. You can almost hear the drums, the chants, the whispered prayers drifting upward, and as night falls, the stars ignite overhead, the same constellations that once guided the builders. Somewhere in that vast silence, you begin to understand what they sought, not just to worship the sun, but to become part of its eternal rhythm. The Pyramid of the Sun was not a tomb for the dead, it was a tomb that faced the sky, built to remind the universe that humanity too could rise toward the light. The air over Teotihuacan still hums with secrets. Even now, centuries after its fall, the Pyramid of the Sun stands as if holding its breath, as if waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear what it's been trying to say for 2,000 years. Archaeologists walk its corridors and tunnels with delicate instruments and careful steps, but beneath the layers of earth and dust, something else lingers. The pulse of a city that once believed it stood at the center of the cosmos. No one knows what ended Teotihuacan. Around the year 550 CE, flames swept through its grandest temples. Charred beams and collapsed roofs tell the story of sudden destruction, not decay. The city's population had already begun to decline. Water sources dwindled, trade routes shifted, and internal strife may have boiled into revolt. Some believe that the priests who once commanded awe became symbols of tyranny, their rituals demanding more life than the city could give. The people rose up, burning the temples of the sun and moon, breaking the order that had once kept their world balanced. When the flames died, Teotihuacan was silent again. The once mighty city, the place where gods were born, was left to the wind and the sand. For 1,000 years, its pyramids sat empty, overtaken by grasses and birds. And yet, they never truly vanished. Travelers who passed through the valley spoke of giant staircases leading to the heavens, of roads that stretched straight into the horizon, of gods who had once lived among men. By the time the Aztecs rediscovered the ruins in the 14th century, Teotihuacan was already ancient. They believed the pyramids were the birthplace of the fifth sun, the current world cycle, according to their mythology. To them, the city wasn't the work of mortals but of divine beings who sacrificed themselves to rekindle the sun after a great cosmic darkness. The Aztecs climbed the pyramid in ritual pilgrimages, leaving offerings at its summit, honoring those vanished builders as gods themselves. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they recorded the local legends with wonder and unease. The conquistadors couldn't believe that such vast architecture could have been built by Indians, as they called them. They assumed it must have been the work of lost tribes, or even of biblical origins, the Tower of Babel reborn in the New World. For centuries afterward, European scholars speculated endlessly about who had built Teotihuacan: Phoenicians, Egyptians, even Romans, unwilling to imagine that an indigenous civilization could have achieved such grandeur. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeology began to speak on its behalf. Excavations revealed pottery, obsidian tools, murals, and sculptures that tied Teotihuacan unmistakably to Mesoamerican origins. The builders were neither mythical gods nor foreign voyagers. They were people who understood the land intimately, its water, its seasons, its stars. They harnessed volcanic stone, lime, and clay to build something that outlasted empires, and then came the discoveries beneath. In the 1970s, archaeologist Sergio Gomez began exploring the tunnels under the Pyramid of the Sun. The air inside was still and cold, thick with the scent of age. As they descended, the flashlights revealed walls carved smooth by ancient hands and floors dusted with fragments of pottery. Deeper still, the team found traces of offerings, obsidian knives, seashells, carved figurines, and the residue of ancient fires. But what fascinated them most was the sense that the tunnel had been deliberately sealed. Whoever built it wanted it hidden. In the years that followed, new technology helped uncover hidden chambers and passageways, not only beneath the Pyramid of the Sun, but also the smaller Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent nearby. There, researchers discovered something extraordinary: pools of liquid mercury, still shimmering after centuries, arranged in channels like rivers of light. Alongside them lay pyrite crystals, fragments of jade, and strange metallic spheres that reflected torchlight like tiny suns. Some say this was meant to recreate the underworld, a symbolic model of the cosmos. The mercury represented flowing water, the rivers that carried the dead through the afterlife. The spheres perhaps represented stars. To stand there, even now, is to feel the echo of ritual, to sense the depth of belief that shaped such mysteries. No bodies have ever been found beneath the Pyramid of the Sun. No royal tomb, no bones, no sarcophagus. Perhaps that's because it was never meant to hold a single person. It was a temple not to mortality, but to rebirth. The people of Teotihuacan believed the universe was cyclical, that every age must die for another to be born. Their city, their pyramid, was a living offering, a plea to keep the cosmic order intact. When the modern city of San Juan Teotihuacan began to grow nearby, locals called the Great Pyramid La Pirámide del Sol, and for generations they told stories of lights that flickered at its summit on midsummer nights, of whispers in the tunnels, of stones that seemed to hum when touched. Even now, on the spring equinox, crowds gather to climb the pyramid, raising their arms to greet the rising sun, echoing rituals that began more than 18 centuries ago. Standing atop it, you can see the entire ancient city unfold below, the long straight road of the Avenue of the Dead, stretching toward the Pyramid of the Moon. The remains of temples and courtyards, scattered like old constellations, and beyond them, the mountains that once framed this sacred landscape. It's easy to imagine what it looked like when the city was alive. Smoke from hearths curling upward, the scent of maize and incense in the air, murals gleaming red and gold, children running along the plazas, the sound of distant drums calling the faithful to the pyramid. Yet even with all we've learned, so much remains unanswered. Who ruled here? Why did they vanish? What prayers were whispered in the shadow of the pyramid before the flames came? Every discovery brings us closer, and yet somehow, the closer we come, the more elusive Teotihuacan becomes. It refuses to give up its soul. Some researchers believe Teotihuacan's decline wasn't a single catastrophe, but a slow unraveling, the erosion of balance in a city built upon cosmic symmetry. Climate shifts may have dried its rivers. Trade with distant lands may have faltered. The gods themselves, once fed with ceremony and sacrifice, may have seemed silent, and so the people turned inward, tearing down the old order in search of renewal, a cycle that mirrored the very myths they lived by. Centuries passed, the jungle crept closer, the stones sank deeper into the earth, and the wind carried dust over the faces of the gods. But the pyramid endured, and perhaps that was the point all along. It wasn't built to last forever in perfection, but to endure through ruin, to remind the living that faith, in any form, leaves an echo. When the Aztecs stood here, they saw in its shape the divine birthplace of the sun. When modern archaeologists study it, they see the culmination of mathematics, astronomy, and devotion. And when travelers today walk its steps, they feel something older than explanation: the weight of time, the pull of sky, the whisper that creation never truly ends. As the sun dips below the horizon, the pyramid's shadow stretches long across the valley. The stones glow faintly red, then gray, then disappear into the coming night. The air cools, carrying the faint scent of mesquite and dust. The stars blink awake one by one, and for a brief moment, you can almost imagine that the people of Teotihuacan are still here, watching, waiting, their eyes turned upward toward the same sky they built their world to reach. For the Pyramid of the Sun was never merely a monument. It was, and remains, a prayer cast in stone, a reminder that even when civilizations fall silent, their dreams continue to rise with the dawn. The door that faced the dead. Have you ever imagined standing before a doorway so ancient, so vast, that even the desert wind seems to slow before passing through it? The Gate of All Nations in Persepolis was once such a threshold, a place where every people under the Persian sun gathered to enter the empire's beating heart. But now, what remains of it is quiet stone and shadow, holding more memory than sound. In the heart of what was once Persia, amid the dry plains near modern Shiraz, the Gate of All Nations still rises, its colossal pillars lifting skyward, its guardian bulls gazing into an endless horizon. When you approach it, it feels less like visiting a ruin, and more like trespassing upon time itself. Built by order of Xerxes I in the 5th century BCE, the gate once marked the ceremonial entrance to Persepolis, the capital of the Achaemenid Empire, a world that stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. Its name, carved into the language of kings, declared what it stood for: unity under the Persian crown, a place where envoys from every corner of the empire entered to pay homage to the King of Kings. The stones you see today, worn and fractured by centuries of wind and sun, were once burnished and bright. Travelers describe the gate as gleaming, its carvings sharp, its inscriptions crisp beneath the Persian light. The structure itself was designed to awe: 2 immense portals, supported by 3 monolithic columns, flanked by stone bulls that guarded either side. Those bulls were not mere decorations, they were lamassu, divine protectors drawn from Mesopotamian myth, part bull, part human, part eagle. Their presence was a warning and a welcome, symbolizing the strength and watchfulness of the empire's rulers. When visitors passed through these doors, they were not merely entering a palace, they were stepping into the empire's sacred order. The Gate of All Nations served a ritual purpose. During Nowruz, the Persian New Year, delegations from across the vast empire gathered at Persepolis to present tribute. They entered through this gate, carrying gifts: gold, silver, lapis lazuli, spices, textiles, and even exotic animals. They were symbols of the world's diversity, paraded before the great king as proof of his dominion. Each nation's representatives were carved into the palace reliefs, frozen forever in the act of reverence. To pass through the gate was to enter the cosmic center of the Persian world, and to leave behind one's own identity, even if only for a moment. The very alignment of the gate held meaning. Scholars have long noted that it faces slightly westward, toward the setting sun. In ancient Persian thought, the west was associated with endings, rest, and renewal. The sun's daily descent mirrored the soul's journey toward the afterlife. Some believe Xerxes's architects aligned the gate intentionally, transforming it into a symbolic bridge between the world of the living and the eternal. For those who crossed beneath its shadow, it was a ritual purification, a passage through light into sacred space. And in the deeper mythic sense, the door faced not only nations but also the unseen. Over the centuries, local tales claimed the gate faced the realm of the dead. Its bulls, though silent, watched over the spirits that passed westward, ensuring their safe journey into the beyond. The Persians were not known for fear of death. They saw it as transition. Their kings, buried in tombs cut high into the cliffs of Nakshi-Rostam, were believed to rise with the dawn each day. The Gate of All Nations, pointing toward the dying sun, may have been the other half of that cosmic equation, the entry rather than the ascent. When you stand beneath it today, the desert seems to hold its breath. The scale of the structure dwarfs the human figure. The bulls tower nearly 20 feet high, their muscles rendered with a precision that defies time. Between them, the stone threshold is smooth, worn by centuries of wind, perhaps footsteps long gone. Above it, traces of cuneiform script remain, etched in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian: Xerxes the Great King, King of Kings, King of lands containing many nations, son of Darius the King. The repetition of King of Kings was not arrogance but philosophy. The Persians saw the world as layered, the divine above, the earthly below, and their ruler stood between both, mediating order. The gate was not simply architecture, it was theology in stone. In its day, Persepolis was the jewel of the empire, a city built not for defense but for ceremony. It was where the empire came to remind itself of its unity. The great Apadana Hall, the treasury, and the 100 Columns Hall rose beyond the gate like mountains of human craft. But time does not bow forever, even to kings. In 330 BCE, Alexander the Great swept through Persia. The city burned. Ancient accounts claim the fire began as a drunken act of revenge, perhaps by Alexander himself, perhaps by his soldiers. Flames leapt from building to building, devouring cedar roofs and melting gold in rivers of heat. The Gate of All Nations, carved from heavier stone, survived, and thus it became the city's witness. Later legends said that as Persepolis burned, the bulls cried tears of dust. Villagers in later centuries believed that the gate wept not only for the empire but for the souls trapped within, the courtiers, servants, and guards who died before ever leaving the city. They said their spirits lingered at the threshold, unable to cross, condemned to walk between life and death for eternity. Whether myth or memory, it gave the site a solemn aura that persists even now. Archaeologists have found evidence of the fire. charred beams, ash embedded in floor cracks, but also something stranger. Beneath the gate's base, hidden for centuries, a small cache of offerings was discovered, fragments of ceramics, traces of oil, and tiny figurines of bulls and birds. Perhaps they were ritual deposits made by workers during construction, or perhaps, as later priests suggested, they were left to appease whatever guardian force the gate embodied. By moonlight, the gate transforms. Tourists rarely see it at night, but for those who have, it appears alive. The shadows of the bulls lengthen, merging into one another. The air seems to vibrate faintly, the same way the desert hums before dawn. You begin to understand how this place could inspire both awe and unease. The silence here is not absence, it is density filled with the weight of centuries of footsteps and breath. Standing beneath the arch, one feels very small, very temporary. In that sense, the Gate of all nations still fulfills its purpose. It humbles, it reminds, it invites all who stand before it, Persians, Greeks, strangers from distant futures, to acknowledge the vastness of time. The Achaemenid Empire, for all its splendor, lasted barely 2 centuries. But the stones endure, unblinking. In the carvings, the bulls still guard, and the inscriptions still whisper the same truth. The kings once believed that power, though fleeting, can touch eternity if it's carved deep enough into the earth. The gate's meaning, though born of politics and ceremony, has evolved with time. Today, it stands as a universal symbol of connection, a monument not to empire, but to the idea that humanity itself is a procession of nations, forever passing through the same doorway between life and memory. Every empire rises, gathers its multitudes, and fades, leaving only echoes in stone. The Gate of all nations has become, by accident, the world's memorial to that truth. In the shifting light of sunrise, its bulls seem to face not only the horizon but also eternity. The inscriptions, half lost, seem to murmur what the Persians once knew in their bones, that all who enter must also one day depart. The doorway remains open, facing both the living and the dead, a quiet reminder that history itself is always in motion. When the wind passes through, it carries the same tone as the ancient ceremonies once held here, a low, resonant hum that feels like the breath of time. You may walk away from it, leaving your footprints in the dust, but the gate remains, patient and eternal. It no longer belongs to kings or conquerors, but to silence, the same silence that once followed the last footsteps of the empire that built it. And in that silence, beneath the watching eyes of stone bulls, the door that faced the dead still stands, facing the same sky it has for 25 centuries, waiting for the next traveler to pass through and remember. The necklace that counted the dead. Beneath the dry Andean air, high upon a plateau that once shimmered with the breath of empire, there lies a fragment of memory so small and unassuming that one might overlook it entirely. A strand of beads, worn, weathered and broken, found within a tomb of the ancient Wari civilization. Yet each bead, polished by hands long turned to dust, carries the echo of 1,000 names, 1,000 stories, and perhaps 1,000 souls. It is known now as the Wari bead necklace, but its purpose, its silent count, remains a mystery whispered between the stones of Wari, Peru. Imagine the world it was born into. Before the Inca, before the Spanish, there was the Wari Empire, a network of roads, fortresses, and ritual centers that stretched across the highlands of Peru nearly 1,300 years ago. They were the precursors to the Inca, masters of administration, trade, and statecraft. And yet, unlike the Inca's monumental stone walls and gold-lined temples, the Wari left behind relics of intimacy, woven cloth, carved wood, delicate beads. In their ruins, archaeologists found tombs where the dead were not buried alone, but adorned, clothed in finery, wrapped in meaning. It was in one such tomb, deep beneath the sunburned soil of Wari, that this necklace lay waiting. The tomb itself was modest compared to royal crypts of later civilizations. There were no grand murals, no golden sarcophagi, only the remains of an individual seated upright, legs crossed, facing the mountains as though in quiet meditation. Around the neck of the deceased was this fragile strand composed of hundreds of tiny beads, each made of turquoise, shell, bone, and stone. Their arrangement was deliberate, rhythmic, patterned, but it was not mere decoration. For the Wari, death was never an end, but a transition, a step onto the sacred path connecting the living to the spirits. The necklace, some scholars believe, was a tool for this passage. Its beads, counted in ritual, may have represented lives lost, ancestors honored, or prayers recited. In essence, it may have been both jewelry and ledger, a sacred register of remembrance. When excavators first uncovered it, they noted that the beads varied in size and material. The turquoise ones shone brightest, symbols of the heavens and the divine, while the darker stones resembled the fertile soil of the earth. Between them, tiny shells, remnants of the distant Pacific, hinted at trade routes stretching hundreds of miles across deserts and mountains. The necklace was not a simple ornament. It was a map of the world as the Wari understood it, a world balanced between sky, earth, and sea. As you imagine the hands that strung those beads, picture a Wari artisan seated by a clay lamp's flickering light, threading memory through fiber, bead by bead. Perhaps she counted the names of her ancestors as she worked. Perhaps she sang softly, each note aligning with a stone. When the necklace was complete, it was placed upon the chest of the departed, its circular form mirroring the Andean concept of time as an eternal cycle. The dead would wear eternity around their necks, and yet, this necklace may have served another purpose, one that speaks to the warrior's mastery of record-keeping and ritual. In several other burials, archaeologists have found similar strands near ceremonial vessels, suggesting they may have been used in rites of counting offerings, sacrifices, or even the years of a ruler's reign. Could it be that this necklace counted the dead, not symbolically, but literally, each bead representing a soul returned to the gods? In the Wari worldview, life and death were interwoven, and numbers held spiritual significance. The act of counting itself was sacred, a means to communicate with divine forces. In this sense, the necklace could have functioned as both memorial and medium, a bridge of enumeration between human and celestial realms. But there's another layer of meaning to this relic, one tied not just to mathematics, but to the human heart. In Andean belief, objects could hold life force, known as kame. An item used in ritual, touched by breath and prayer, could store vitality, an energy that connected it to both the living and the dead. Over centuries, such an artifact was not discarded but renewed, passed from generation to generation. Each bead may have once belonged to another necklace, another person, another age. When the Wari strung them together anew, they were not simply creating a piece of jewelry, they were weaving time itself. As the centuries rolled forward and the Wari Empire faded, the highland winds began to claim their cities. Walls collapsed, fields turned to dust, and the knowledge of their rituals slipped away. The necklace was buried deeper and deeper beneath layers of history, forgotten by all but the earth that guarded it. When it was finally unearthed in the 20th century, its delicate string had decayed to powder, but the beads remained. They were carefully lifted, catalogued, and studied under fluorescent lights, each one a tiny testament to a civilization's lost language of symbols. Some saw in them only craftsmanship, others something greater, a pulse. The archaeologists who first handled it noted that the necklace seemed oddly complete, despite the missing cord, as if its circle had never truly broken. In museums today, behind glass, it may appear lifeless, just a string of small ancient stones. But if one looks closely, if one lets the eyes soften, it begins to shimmer in a peculiar way, as though holding onto a rhythm the heart can almost recognize. Perhaps that is its true secret, that memory does not die, it only changes form. The Wari people, like the Inca after them, understood something profound about the impermanence of life and the permanence of legacy. They did not see time as linear. The past was not behind them but beneath them, woven into the very soil they walked upon, and in that soil they buried not death, but continuity. The necklace of Wari, therefore, is more than adornment, it is evidence of this philosophy. The beads are words in a language that spoke through color and repetition, where blue was prayer, white was purity, red was sacrifice, and black was rebirth. Each combination a sentence, each strand a story. Imagine for a moment standing in the burial chamber where it was found. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of dust and clay. A narrow beam of light from a researcher's lamp glides across the beads. They glint softly, like stars half buried in sand. In that instant, the gap between your heartbeat and theirs, the living and the dead, narrows. For the Wari, to remember was to relive. To hold an object like this was to hold the thread of existence itself. And that thread, fragile though it seems, still endures. Even as we study and label it, even as it rests behind glass, the necklace continues to perform its ancient duty. It counts. Not years, not numbers, but moments. Every gaze that falls upon it adds another to the chain. Every story told about it renews the cycle. It reminds us that civilizations are not lost, only waiting to be heard again. Today, as historians piece together the mosaic of the Wari world from pottery shards and foundations, they realize how advanced this forgotten culture was. They built road systems that later inspired the Inca. They engineered reservoirs and terraced agriculture. They traded obsidian, textiles, and spiritual ideas across vast distances. And at the heart of it all lay their belief in balance between people, nature, and gods. The necklace embodies that harmony. Its materials come from the mountains, the coasts, and the rivers. Its form unites opposites, hard stone and soft cord, permanence and decay. It is both earthly and divine. When the Wari fell, their symbols did not vanish. they flowed onward into later Andean cultures. The Inca wore similar necklaces during festivals honoring the dead, and even today, in remote Andean villages, strands of colored beads are offered to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, as tokens of gratitude and remembrance. In that continuity lies the true immortality of the Wari bead necklace. It teaches us that art and ritual were never separate, that memory can be worn, and that even the smallest things, no larger than a fingertip, can carry the weight of empires. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, a soft, steady rhythm like counting beads between fingers. One for the sky, one for the sea, one for the soil, one for the soul. The necklace that counted the dead still counts, not to measure loss but to measure connection, the endless thread between the living and those who built the world before us. The finger that drew fire, in the dry hush of Syria's northern coast, beneath centuries of drifting sand, archaeologists once unearthed a city that had vanished before the birth of Rome. Its name was Ugarit, a name barely remembered until clay and ruin whispered it back into the world. The city had slept for more than 3,000 years. Its walls were worn smooth, its temples choked in dust, its people gone, but their words pressed into the earth still waited to be read, and among them lay a single bronze stylus, darkened by time. A tool so small, it could rest across your palm, yet it had once held the weight of human thought. They called it, the finger that drew fire. To understand why, you have to picture Ugarit, not as ruins but alive. A shining harbor city around 1400 BCE, where the scent of cedar mixed with sea salt and the cries of gulls. Traders came from Cyprus, Egypt, and Crete, their ships heavy with copper, wine, and ivory. On the quays, merchants shouted in a dozen tongues. Priests walked in slow procession to the temple of Baal, the storm god, and somewhere near the palace, in a quiet chamber lit by oil lamps, a scribe leaned over a wet clay tablet, the stylus in his hand gleaming faintly in the firelight. The stylus itself was nothing elaborate, a bronze rod, its tip squared for pressing wedge-shaped symbols into clay. But in that humble motion, the press of metal into earth, something extraordinary was being born. Every mark was a spark of meaning, every sign a fragment of fire passed from mind to matter. The people of Ugarit were taking a step that would change the human world forever. They were inventing an alphabet. Before them, writing had been the realm of the elite, a labyrinth of symbols requiring years to master. The Mesopotamians had thousands of signs, the Egyptians, hundreds, but Ugarit's scribes did something radical. They reduced language to sound, to its smallest bones. Only 30 simple symbols could now build any word that could be spoken. With their stylus, they captured the essence of speech, and suddenly, knowledge, that most sacred of powers, became something almost anyone could learn. Inside those clay rooms, scribes recorded everything. Prayers to the gods, royal decrees, the weights of grain, the letters of kings, but they also wrote poems and hymns, myths of thunder and sea. Baalil hears, Baal thunders, one tablet reads, its wedges neatly arranged. He rides the clouds and gives voice to the storm. The stylus that carved those lines gave voice to a god, and through that act, to a civilization. The words were not merely remembered, they were given life in the cool permanence of clay. The stylus of Ugarit would have been passed from hand to hand, from master to apprentice, father to son. It was a tool, but also an inheritance. The bronze would warm slightly under the touch, the edge polishing over years of use. When a scribe lifted it, he was not merely writing, he was joining an unbroken lineage of thought, tracing a fire that began when humans first dreamed of permanence. Each word pressed into clay was a promise. I was here. I saw. I remembered. Beyond the palace, Ugarit thrived. Its markets overflowed with Mycenaean pottery and lapis lazuli. Its libraries, vast for their time, stored hundreds of tablets in ordered stacks, each marked with the stylus's gentle touch. The city's scribes became famed throughout the region, their script spreading across the Levant. They had found a way to store sound, to give speech a body, and in doing so, they had bridged the ephemeral and the eternal. But all light casts shadow. The same sea that brought ships bearing goods also carried omens of destruction. The Bronze Age world was beginning to fracture. Distant kingdoms burned, palaces fell, trade routes snapped, and one day, sometime around 1200 BCE, Ugarit's scribes began to write messages of fear. Letters unearthed from their archives tell a story that chills the soul even now. The enemy's ships have come. They have set fire to my cities. The sea peoples are upon us. Perhaps the scribe who wrote those words did so with this very stylus, his hand trembling as he pressed the metal into clay. Outside, the sky would have glowed red with flame. The scent of smoke would have filled the archives. Did he know that this was the last message he would ever write, that the city's libraries would soon collapse around him, sealing his words in a tomb of ash? When the fires came, they were absolute. Roofs caved in, the palace fell. The sound of styluses scratching clay was replaced by the roar of destruction. The city of words, a city built on language itself, fell silent. And in that silence, the stylus slipped from its owner's hand, landing in the dust beside the tablets it had helped create. The finger that drew fire had finished its work. Centuries passed. The Mediterranean world changed beyond recognition. Empires rose and fell. The alphabet of Ugarit transformed into the alphabets of Phoenicia, Greece, Rome. And one day, long after memory had turned to myth, the sands were disturbed again. Archaeologists digging through the ruins of Ras Shamra, the modern name for Ugarit's resting place, uncovered thousands of clay tablets. Beside them lay a single bronze stylus, its point worn smooth but unmistakable. The connection was immediate. The same stylus that had once pressed words into clay still matched perfectly with the wedge-shaped impressions nearby. It was as if time had paused mid-motion, as if the scribe had only just stepped away. In that instant, the modern world met its ancestor. The first alphabet had been reborn from the ashes of its own language, and the stylus, humble and dark, gleamed again under the Syrian sun, the same sun that once shone on Ugarit's harbor 3,000 years before. The archaeologists lifted it carefully, brushing the dust from its grooves, and perhaps, just for a moment, they felt what that long-lost scribe had felt: the weight of words, the power of permanence, the miracle of thought made visible. The bronze was cold, but beneath its surface, the fire still lived. When the finger that drew fire was first lifted from the ruins of Ugarit, the air around it seemed to hold a kind of hush, as though the centuries themselves paused to listen. The archaeologists stood in the sunlight, blinking dust from their eyes, and realized that what they held was not merely a tool, but a thread, one that connected every written word, every letter, every alphabet that came after. It was the beginning of literacy as we know it, lying silent in their hands. In the laboratory later, under the soft hum of fluorescent lamps, the stylus revealed its secrets slowly. Microscopic examination showed faint traces of hardened clay, pressed deep into the metal's grooves, the remnants of words still clinging after 3 millennia. They were microscopic fossils of thought, fragments of human sound turned into matter. The clay carried the mineral signature of Ras Shamra's earth, matching the tablets found only meters away. There was no doubt this had been a working stylus, not a ceremonial one. It had written, day after day, in the service of a civilization that trusted the permanence of clay over the frailty of memory. As researchers studied the tool, they began to reconstruct the hands that had used it. The stylus was balanced perfectly for one-handed use, with just enough weight to press the wedge shapes cleanly into moist clay. A right-handed writer, likely seated cross-legged on a reed mat, would have rested the tablet on a board or knee. Each stroke required precision, rhythm, a kind of meditative control. To write was both craft and devotion. The Ugaritic scribes were not mere clerks, they were custodians of the divine breath. In those centuries, writing was the bridge between gods and mortals. Every sign recorded on a tablet was an act of reverence, every message a spark of continuity. The stylus did not just mark clay, it inscribed the invisible. The myth of Baal, god of storm and renewal, was among Ugarit's most treasured stories. In it, Baal descends into the underworld, defeated by Mot, the god of death, only to rise again with thunder and rain. Some scholars believe the myth symbolized the yearly cycles of drought and fertility, but others, quietly, suspect something deeper, that it mirrored the fate of Ugarit itself. The stylus, like Baal, had fallen into the underworld, into the earth's silence, and was now reborn, carrying its ancient fire into a new age. And as excavations continued, archaeologists unearthed entire libraries buried beneath the ashes. Thousands of tablets, many still perfectly readable, recorded contracts, prayers, letters, songs, and even the earliest known musical notation. The stylus had not only preserved words, but the rhythm of life, the sound of a world that had refused to vanish. In one corner of the excavation site, a tablet was found bearing a letter written by a merchant to his partner. It complained of a delayed shipment of copper ingots. The tone was impatient, human, oddly familiar. Reading it today feels like listening to a voice across time. The stylus had captured something eternal, not just the grand myths of gods and kings, but the small, ordinary frustrations of living. Through that single instrument, the entire range of human expression, sacred, mundane, emotional, was fixed into permanence. Yet Ugarit's rediscovery carried a darker echo. The very clarity of its record exposed the fragility of civilization. For all its sophistication, its trade routes, its alphabet, the city had fallen in a matter of weeks. One day, the scribes were recording shipments. The next, they were inscribing pleas for help. And then, silence. The stylus had fallen from its hand, and an entire world of words went dark. But history is not simply about what is lost. It is about what survives. The stylus of Ugarit was found because clay endures where paper burns, because metal persists where voices fade. The Ugaritic alphabet, carved first by that bronze tip, became the ancestor of Phoenician script, which in turn shaped Greek, Latin, and all the alphabets that followed. The words you read now, the shapes that fill this page, owe their ancestry to that moment when a scribe pressed bronze into clay beside the sea. If you trace the alphabet backward, letter by letter, sound by sound, you end up in Ugarit's dusty chambers, in the dim light of an oil lamp, beside a man who believed that words could live forever. And in a sense he was right. The stylus he held out lasted his city, his language, his gods. It endured to remind us that the act of writing, of fixing thought into the world, is one of humanity's quiet miracles. Today the stylus rests behind glass in the Aleppo Museum. It is unassuming, dark, slender, unadorned. Visitors might walk past it without realizing that they are standing before one of history's turning points. Yet if you linger long enough, if you imagine the glow of a long-dead fire reflected in that bronze, you might sense what it once meant, a bridge between silence and sound, a hand reaching across time. And perhaps you'll feel that the fire it drew, that first spark of language, still burns within every word we write, for every message, every letter, every whispered name carries the same impulse that once moved a scribe beside the Mediterranean 3,000 years ago, the wish to be remembered, the desire to leave behind a trace of thought, pressed gently into the clay of time. That is the legacy of the finger that drew fire, a small piece of bronze that outlived its civilization to ignite the written world, a tool that turns silence into sound, thought into symbol, breath into eternity. And even now as we type, print, or speak, its flame continues, invisible, ancient, alive. The pot that held a dream. Long before the rise of emperors, before the first palace stones were laid or the swordsmith's fire ever glowed, there were people who shaped dreams out of clay. Along the misty northern coast of what is now Japan, some 7,000 years ago, the Jomon people tended their fires beneath canopies of cedar and cypress. Their world was quieter, yet filled with rhythm, the rhythm of tides, the whisper of forest rain, the hum of life itself. And in this world, they made something extraordinary. The flame pot. It wasn't a simple vessel meant for boiling grains or storing seeds. It was something far more mysterious. Rising from its rounded body, twisting forms erupted like tongues of fire, frozen in motion, sharp ridges, swirling spirals, loops that seemed to defy the softness of clay. When light struck its surface, the shadows trembled across its curves, as if alive. It looked less like a pot and more like a vision, a dream captured in earth. Archaeologists first found these flame pots buried beneath layers of ancient soil in the Umataka site of Niigata. The discovery was like finding a heartbeat in the earth, something human, familiar, yet impossible to explain. The pot's design was so elaborate that even modern ceramicists struggle to replicate it with the same grace and precision. How, they wondered, did people with no metal tools create such complexity? Why did they spend days, perhaps weeks, shaping clay into something too intricate for daily use? As the Jomon lived, they built no kingdoms, no monuments of stone, but in their pottery, they carved a spiritual world. The vessels, covered with flames, spirals, and waves, seemed to echo the forces around them, fire, water, wind, and earth. They may have believed that by shaping these powers into clay, they could harmonize with the natural balance of their world. To the Jomon, every living thing had a spirit, a kami, and the act of creation was an offering, a conversation between human and nature. At dusk, the potters of Niigata gathered near the riverbank, shaping wet earth by hand. The clay was heavy, cool, and filled with tiny fragments of shells and stone, reminders that life and earth were inseparable. As the fire cracked in the night, shadows from the flames danced along the edges of unfinished pots. Each motion of their hands was deliberate, patient, almost meditative. The twisting rim, that spectacular, fiery crown, may have symbolized the flicker of the sacred hearth, the breath of the sun, or perhaps even the eternal cycle of life and death. When the pots were complete, they were baked in open fires, flames licking across the surface, leaving faint black traces of smoke, giving each vessel a unique fingerprint of creation. These marks still remain after thousands of years, the memory of fire etched into clay. Some pots bear burn marks only on the bottom, suggesting they were used in rituals, perhaps filled with offerings, incense, or food meant for the gods. Others, untouched by flame, seem to have been purely ceremonial, sacred objects meant to stand before the unseen. The more we study them, the clearer it becomes. The Jomon flame pot was never just about function. It was an act of imagination, of storytelling without words. Each curve and ridge seems to move like a wave, an echo of the surrounding world. To hold one is to feel that ancient pulse, the rhythm of people who looked at fire and saw creation itself. The Jomon period spanned thousands of years, far longer than any empire that came after. In that vast stretch of time, their art never stood still. Early pots were simple and round, but over generations they grew wilder, more daring, as though the people themselves had learned to dream in clay. By the Middle Jomon period, around 2500 BCE, the flame motif reached its zenith. No two pots were alike, each was a unique burst of vision. Imagine the world as they knew it. Thick forests alive with boar and deer, rivers full of salmon, fields bright with millet and nuts. The air smelled of smoke and moss. And amidst this abundance, humans reached for meaning, not through conquest, but through beauty. They poured their dreams into vessels of earth, the same way later cultures would carve them into marble, or write them on parchment. The flame pot is perhaps the oldest known example of art that seems to serve emotion more than survival. Its presence whispers that even in prehistory, humans were not just builders or hunters, they were poets of the earth. Each pot tells us that the desire to make something beautiful for its own sake is not modern, but ancient, older than metal, older than written words, and when we look at it today, behind museum glass, it still feels alive. Its flames seem to flicker when the light shifts. Its ridges cast shadows like rising smoke. You can almost imagine the hand that shaped it, the fingers pressing, smoothing, twisting. You can feel the same breath that once blew across Nisargada's forests thousands of years ago. Some scholars believe the flame pot was connected to fertility rituals or to the cycles of agriculture, its swirling shape symbolizing the rising of new life from the soil. Others see in it a symbol of transformation, the union of fire and earth, that mirrors the human spirit's struggle to create, to endure, to renew. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere simpler, somewhere between the practical and the sacred. Maybe it was both, a pot to cook and a prayer to the world that provided the food within it. When the Jomon placed these pots into the ground, sometimes as offerings, sometimes alongside the dead, they were not just burying objects, they were planting stories, hoping that somewhere in the cycles of time, someone would listen again. And we have. Thousands of years later, as archaeologists brushed the soil away from those curling clay flames, the dream stirred once more. The pot that had waited beneath the earth still seemed to glow with that ancient fire, the fire of imagination, of humanity itself. The Jomon never built cities, never raised armies, never wrote their names, yet they left us something that might last longer than any empire, a dream, shaped by hand, hardened by flame, and cradled forever in the memory of the earth. When the first rays of dawn touched the mist-wrapped forests of Niigata, the pot still sat where it had always been, deep within a hollow earth shrine. The archaeologists who found it that morning thought it was just another shard, another broken piece from Japan's ancient Jomon culture. But as the soil slipped from its ridged surface, they realized it wasn't broken at all. It was complete, perfectly preserved, every flame-like curve still alive with intention. They didn't yet understand that they were staring at something that was never just a vessel for food or offerings. It was something closer to a map, one drawn not for the eyes, but for dreams. The Jomon flame pot was born nearly 5,000 years before the first samurai or the great temples of Kyoto. Long before metal, before writing, before rice. Its makers were hunters, gatherers, fishers, people who lived by the rhythms of fire and sea. Yet somehow, they built objects with designs that felt as if they belonged to another world. Wild, flowing, almost cosmic in motion. The flame pot's twisting rim, curling upward like tongues of fire, was not mere decoration. It was the physical shape of a belief that life and death were never separate things, only spirals turning through one another. In its center, where once perhaps water, seeds, or sake rested, the ancient Jomon saw reflection. They called it kami, the breath of the unseen, and they believed their dreams were how they touched it. Inside this pot, they might have placed fragments of their world, ash from the hearth, bones from a hunt, shells from the river's edge, and then watched how the surface rippled when they poured in water, how the firelight danced along the carved lines. It was through this ritual that they spoke to their ancestors, and through their ancestors to the dreaming world. The pot was their mirror to eternity. When researchers studied it in the modern day, they noticed something odd. The pot's patterns seemed to move. Under changing light, the designs gave the illusion of motion, as if the flames were alive. Scientists brushed it off as pareidolia, but one of them, a quiet ceramics specialist named Hina, wasn't convinced. She ran her fingers along its edges and found faint markings, nearly invisible beneath the glaze of time. Not random scratches, sequences, 4 curved symbols that repeated only once around the rim. They weren't known in any Jomon context. They seemed to form instructions. When she traced them in a continuous spiral, she noticed that they aligned with a small cavity at the pot's base. It wasn't hollowed by accident. Something had once been there, maybe an embedded stone, or something organic that decayed. But the cavity's depth and precision suggested purpose. Hina began to dream of it. Night after night, she dreamt of a fire pit beneath stars, of people gathered around, their shadows painted on stone. They sang without words, breathing in rhythm with the flickering light. And at the center of the ring, the pot glowed, not from within, but from the patterns themselves, each line ignited by the reflection of flames. She woke with a strange scent of smoke in her hair, though no fire had been lit. The dreams became so vivid, she began recording them, sketching the shapes she saw. The sketches matched carvings found miles away, at other Jomon sites, spirals, flames, waveforms. Across generations and landscapes, the same vision repeated. It was as if the Jomon people had tried to preserve the shape of something they saw beyond their waking world, something born in fire and sleep alike. The flames on the pot were not depictions of fire at all. They were dreams captured in clay. Archaeologists later analyzed residues on the pot's inner surface. What they found wasn't food, it was pigment, natural dyes from crushed shells and rare minerals, possibly used for ritual body painting or trance ceremonies. The pot might have held the very paints used to blur the line between body and spirit, between the visible and the hidden, between dream and waking. In her last field note before retiring, Hina wrote that the pot's creators might have seen dreaming as an act of creation equal to making fire or shaping earth, that in sleep, they molded invisible matter, and the pot was how they remembered that craft. The name Flame Pot, she argued, was misleading. It should be the pot that held a dream, because that was all it ever did, hold what could not otherwise be contained. Even now, when you stand before it in the quiet halls of the Niigata Museum, its surface seems to hum. The light bends across it, curling in strange directions, as if following a rhythm too old to name, and if you stare long enough, letting your eyes soften, you might notice the same thing Hina did, that faint shimmer at its base, where once something bright was buried, something that looks, for just an instant, like an ember still glowing, a dream that refuses to cool. Thank you for wandering through the echoes of forgotten worlds with us tonight. If these ancient whispers stirred your curiosity, remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Tell us which artifact spoke to you the most, and where in the world you're watching from. Until next time, sleep well, and let history keep you dreaming.